Today I will speak in English. I am beginning to have an identity crisis between my Spanish or my Castilian, so thank you very much, Paul, and for the nice words you have said. Not all true. Later on, I'm going to tell you to distinguish between imagination and fantasy. Imagination is what I have to do to keep Paul in Rome. Fantasy is what he just did right now. No equal time for an answer. As I said last night, well, I didn't say it, but it was good for me to be here yesterday and listen to the presentations of those who represented the different parts of the world, and then to hear about what was going on in your groups, the presentation of Fernando Montes, which I appreciated very much. And I really feel like I am preaching to the choir. So you are far ahead in whatever of the points I might make today, so you can relax. I don't want to fall asleep, but if you do, don't worry. So I have to say that I'm very happy to be here with you this morning on this, I think, a remarkable occasion as colleagues of nearly all of the roughly 200 institutions of higher education operating under the banner of the Society of Jesus. You gather here to consider the importance of Jesuit education and its future. I'm happy to greet all of you, collaborators in the mission and ministry of the Society, Jesuits, friends of the Society, and of Jesuit higher education, and any student, if there is any. I want to thank particularly Father Jose Morales, not only for the good jokes we heard in private, president of the Iberoamericana, and the staff of the Iberoamericana for their hospitality and extraordinary efforts in ensuring all the arrangements for this conference. I think we appreciate very much what is happening and what will happen. And I can tell you on the side that I'm enjoying very much this visit to Mexico. They are very warm people, very warm, very hospitable, very friendly, and very humorous, which is great. I mean, that it opens the heart and allows you to relax and consider yourself a human person. Finally, I thank all of you for your participation in Jesuit higher education and in this conference, which some of you began before arriving here by authoring the excellent papers that serve to stimulate our discussions. For the sake of simplifying language, I will use universities when referring to the wide range of higher education institutions represented here in the Assembly, ranging from specialized research centers to technical institutes, to colleges, and naturally to large, complex universities. In the past 2 years, in my present service, I have traveled to many parts of the world to encounter Jesuits and our collaborators. And I have always emphasized that I am as eager, in fact, more eager, to listen and to learn rather than to speak from the lofty and mythical heights of Borgo Santo Spiritu, an address you know. I bring this same dialogical spirit to this meeting of Jesuit higher education. As I listened yesterday to your discussions of regional challenges and the 3 frontier challenges that you selected to address, I could see that you already tackled many of the serious contemporary problems that Pope John Paul II identified for us in his apostolic constitution, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, and that you are doing so with the depth of thought, imagination, moral passion, and spiritual conviction that characterize Catholic and Jesuit education at its best. What I wish to share this morning, therefore, should be taken as adding my own perspective to what I hope will be an ongoing and ever deeper conversation in the future of Jesuit higher education. My own experience is that university people, especially university presidents, are not shy about sharing their points of view, even those who are not presidents. So I'm confident, as you continue your consideration of important issues, that your conversations will, at the very least, be spirited and insightful. The theme of our conference, Networking Jesuit Higher Education, Shaping the Future for a Humane, Just, Sustainable Globe, involves a very bold proposal. It suggests that we have today an extraordinary opportunity to have a hand in helping to shape the future, not only of our own institutions, but of the world, and that the way we can do that is through networking. And that word, networking, so often used these days, is in fact typical of the new world in which we live, a world which has its own principal new future, which Pope Benedict XVI calls the explosion of worldwide interdependence, commonly known as globalization. The 35th General Congregation also saw our interconnectedness as the new context for understanding the world and discerning our mission. I am aware that the word globalization carries different meanings and evokes different reactions for people of diverse cultures. There has been much discussion on both the positive features and the negative effects of globalization, and I need not review them here. Rather, what I wish to invite us to reflect on together is this: how does this new context challenge us to redirect, in some sense, the mission of Jesuit higher education? You represent very different kinds of institutions from every part of the world, serving students, regions, and countries with widely divergent cultures, religions, resources, and having distinctive regional and local roles to play. Clearly, the question of the challenge of globalization for the mission of Jesuit higher education needs to be answered by each institution in its unique social, cultural, and religious circumstances. But I wish to emphasize that it is also a question that calls for a common and universal response, drawn, of course, from your diverse cultural perspectives, from Jesuit higher education as a whole, as an apostolic sector. How then does this new context of globalization, with the exciting possibilities and serious problems it has brought to our world, challenge Jesuit higher education to redefine or at least redirect its mission? I would like to invite you to consider three distinct but related challenges to our shared mission that this new explosion of interdependence poses for us. First, promoting depth of thought and imagination. Second, rediscovering and implementing our universality as the Jesuit higher education sector. And third, renewing the Jesuit commitment to learned ministry. So let me go one by one. First, promoting depth of thought and imagination. I will begin quite forthrightly with what I see as a negative effect of globalization, what I will call the globalization of superficiality. I am told that I am the first Jesuit general to use email and to surf the web. Not all the time, though. So I trust that what I will say will not be mistaken as lack of appreciation of the new information and communication technologies. and their many positive contributions and possibilities. I'm quite positive, and I use it regularly. Just before coming, I played with the computer of Pepe Morales. However, I think that all of you have experienced what I am calling the globalization of superficiality, and how it affects so profoundly the thousands of young people entrusted to us in our institutions. When one can access so much information so quickly and so painlessly, when one can express and publish to the world one's reactions so immediately and so unthinkingly in one's blogs or microblogs, when the latest opinion column from the New York Times or El País or the newest viral video can be spread so quickly to people half a world away, shaping their perceptions and feelings, then the laborious, painstaking work of serious critical thinking often gets short-circuited. I don't think I reveal any secret if I say that a couple of professors, Jesuit professors of Sofia University, have told me when I was provincial, so that was about 15 years ago, they told me, the internet is wonderful. You get so much information, so quick and so easily. No? And at the same time said, but at the same time, I have to confess that now I read less, I think less, and I spend less time discerning what to do. And if professors say this, what can we say of the students? One can cut and paste and pass without the need to think critically or write accurately or come to one's own careful conclusions. When beautiful images of what the merchants of consumer dreams sell flood one's computer screens, or when the ugly or unpleasant sounds of the world can be shut out by one's MP3 music player, then one's vision or one's perception of reality, one's desiring can also remain shallow. When one can become friends so quickly and so painlessly with mere acquaintances or total strangers on one's social networks, and if one can so easily unfriend another without the hard work of encounter, or if need be confrontation and then reconciliation, then relationships can also become superficial. I'm sure you know cases like I know of young men who connect through the wireless telephone, the telefonino, and they make friends, and they have several friends around. They never meet, but they always talk on the phone. And suddenly, one good day, one of them feels like they are going deep enough to meet and says, why don't we meet? And at that instant, they put it off, and that's the end. Meeting brings problems. And therefore, we keep the relationship at the superficial level. And I think this is a very serious flaw in our modern relationships. When one is overwhelmed with such a dizzying pluralism of choices and values and beliefs and visions of life, then one can so easily slip into the lazy superficiality of relativism or mere tolerance of others and their views, rather than engaging in the hard work of forming communities of dialogue in the search for truth and understanding. It is easier to do as one is told than to study, to pray, to risk, or to discern a choice. I think the challenges posed by the globalization of superficiality of thought, of vision, of dreams, of relationships, of convictions, to Jesuit higher education needs deeper analysis, reflection, and discernment than we have time to do this morning. All I wish to signal here is my concern that our new technologies together with the underlying values such as moral relativism and consumerism, are shaping the interior worlds of so many, especially the young people we are educating. And we heard yesterday the 6 persons that presented different backgrounds, how this is a reality that is already felt in many of our institutions, limiting the fullness of their flourishing as human persons and their responses to a world in need of healing intellectually, morally, and spiritually. We need to understand this complex new interior world created by globalization more deeply and intelligently, so that we can respond more adequately and decisively as educators to counter the deleterious effects of such superficiality. For a world of globalized superficiality of thought means the unchallenged reign of fundamentalism, fanaticism, ideology, and all those escapes from thinking that cause suffering for so many. Shallow, self-absorbed perception of reality make it almost impossible to feel compassion for the suffering of others, and a contentment with the satisfaction of immediate desires or the laziness to engage competing claims on one's deepest loyalty results in the inability to commit one's life to what is truly worthwhile. I'm really convinced that these kind of processes bring that sort of dehumanization that we are already beginning to experience in our world. If people lose the ability to engage with reality, there is a process of dehumanization that might be slow coming, silent, but I think very real. People are losing their mental home, their culture, their points of reference. I heard from a professor of philosophy in the United States who told me that he prefers any time among his students to have a convinced communist or a convinced atheist or a convinced Muslim rather than those who have nothing, who have no convictions, for whom everything is the same because they cannot learn philosophy. They have nothing to protect, nothing to engage into discussion, nothing to put them on a situation of learning. Everything is equally irrelevant. Thus, more than ever, the globalization of superficiality challenges Jesuit higher education to promote in creative new ways the depth of thought and imagination that are distinguishing marks of the Ignatian tradition. Yesterday, Father Fernando Montes gave us an excellent reflection on what is happening to Jesuit tradition and the Jesuit present encounter with a change of epoch for which we have no classics. No classics. I will make a reference later to that point because I consider very important. I have no doubt that all our universities are characterized by excellence. That remains. And the striving towards excellence in teaching and learning and research. This is very true of all Jesuit institutions in general. I want to put this in the context of the Ignatian tradition of depth, of thought, and in the use of the imagination. This means that we aim to bring our students beyond excellence of professional training to become well-educated whole persons of solidarity, as Father Kolbenbach noted. Perhaps what I mean can be best explained by reflecting a bit on the pedagogy, if one may call it like this, in the contemplations on the mysteries of the life of Jesus in the spiritual exercises, which pedagogy Ignatius later applied to Jesuit education. I saw in a study on education a reference to St. Ignatius, and the reference was put in the form of a quote. I challenged the author to give me the exact place where Ignatius said that, because I don't think he said that. No. And he couldn't find it, so we are still searching. But anyway, the content, I think it was correct. But the quote, you will not find it. But it says, St. Ignatius supported and wanted education with the classics because the classics train the imagination. It's a very interesting point of view. But yesterday, Father Fernando Montes told us that, well, the classics in the 16th century was a bit looking back. But now these classics are not so close, they are not so familiar, they are not so available to us. But still, the challenge continues. If the classics train the imagination, we need them. And maybe our question today is to see, where do we look for the classics? Is it still Greece and Rome, or can we look at China, Japan? Can we look at India? Can we look at the classics of the indigenous communities in different parts of the world, Africa, Latin America, etc., etc.? I think what we need is to open the whole range of the human mind. And that's what the classics did for us in the past. And this is something that we have to continue asking. One might call this pedagogy of Ignatian contemplation the exercise of the creative imagination. The imagination works in cooperation with memory, as we know from the exercises. The English term used for the acts of the faculty of memory is very much apropos. I like to imagine, to understand this, that what Ignatius proposed is very much like the transformation of a jigsaw puzzle. Imagine a big jigsaw puzzle with your face in the middle. And now Ignatius asks us to break it into pieces, to dismember before we can remember. So we break the puzzle into pieces, and then we begin, through the active imagination, the creative imagination, to rebuild ourselves as we build the scenes of Bethlehem, the scenes of Galilee, the scenes of Jerusalem. We begin a process of recreating, really. And in the process of doing this, we are remembering, putting our members together. And that's why Ignatius separates seeing from hearing, from touching, from tasting, from smelling. The application of the senses is a form of dismembering and remembering. It's a process of, it's an exercise. And the hope is that at the end, when the jigsaw puzzle is formed again, is not our face anymore, but eventually is the face of Christ that comes. Because we have been rebuilding something different, something new. And in the process, we are being transformed. That's what I think we can understand by Ignatian imagination. It's not fantasy, as we said before. It's not Paul Locatelli thinking, what can be good about this guy, no? That I have to say in public. It's a creative process. And it's a creative process that goes to the depth of reality and begins recreating it. And that requires a lot of imagination. And it's a very powerful tool. And Ignatius works with it. The Ignatian contemplation is precisely moving from the left side of the brain to the right. Imagination is not the same as fantasy. Fantasy is irreal, is flying from reality, is going to a world where we begin to create images for the sake of diversity of images. Imagination is trying to grasp reality. In other words, depth of thought and imagination in the Ignatian tradition involves a profound engagement with the real, a refusal to let go till one goes beneath the surface, careful analysis, for the sake of an integration, remembering, around what is deepest, which is God, Christ, the gospel. The starting point, then, will always be what is real, what is materially, concretely thought to be there. The world as we encounter it, the world of the senses, so vividly described in the Gospels themselves. A world of suffering and need, a broken world with many broken people in need of healing. We start there. We don't run away from there. And then Ignatius guides us, and students of Jesuit education have the same model, as he did the retreatants, to enter into the depths of that reality. Beyond what can be perceived most immediately, he leads one to see the hidden presence and action of God in what is seen, touched, smelled, and felt. And that encounter with what is deepest changes us, changes the person. I found very interesting that the Ministry of Education of Japan did, a good number of years ago, a study of Japanese education, modern Japanese education, what has happened to education, and they came up with a very honest and they were transparent enough to communicate to the general public that Japanese education had made great advances in science, in technology, in mathematics, in memory work, and all that, but they have weakened, they have become weaker in imagination, creativity, and critical sense. These were the 3 points that were, and I think these are 3 points that are essential to Jesuit education. Imagination, creativity, and critical sense. Creativity might be one of the most needed things in the present times. Real creativity, not just following slogans or repeating what we have heard or what we have seen in Wikipedia. But real creativity is a very active, very dynamic process of finding responses to real questions, finding alternatives to a world that seems to go in directions that nobody can control and that we are not happy with. Personally, this is a question that has been with me for a long, long time. When I was teaching theology, I thought that what was needed was begin with pastoral theology, because we cannot ask a Japanese community that has been educated and raised in a different tradition to begin producing speculative theology from the very beginning. Let's go back to the basic experience. And in pastoral theology, I was particularly puzzled by creativity. What makes a pastor creative? And I worked on that. And then I realized that very often we accept dilemmas where there are no dilemmas. I think there are dilemmas. Now and then we have a dilemma. We don't know what to choose. Whatever we choose is going to be wrong. But those are very, very few. The rest are dilemmas because we don't want to think more, because we don't have creativity, because we don't see a way out and we give up. But most of the times there is a way out. But it requires an effort of the imagination. It requires to see other models, to see other patterns. And I was helped, as I was studying those issues, reading different books, by a concept that when I ran against it, I saw that it's a concept that is being developed by psychologists. The psychologist studies Freud and Eric Fromm and Eric whoever, all the Erics, and all the different schools and so forth. And then they have what they call floating awareness. So they are aware that there are different methods of helping people. No? It's like a floating awareness. And when they encounter the person and diagnose the person, then they choose from these models what is the process that is going to help most. I think this is exactly what a spiritual father would do. And I wish we had this when we celebrate the liturgy. Floating awareness, and see the community and grasp what this community needs now and today. But anyway, it's a very rich and very challenging kind of concept that I think is very important when it comes to education, to accompany our people. And we have problems in the society with formation because of this, because maybe our floating awareness is not so well developed. For about 20 years or so, we have been receiving vocations to the society from groups that we didn't have before. Tribal groups, Dalit in India, in other places, let's say marginal groups, marginal communities. And we have received them with joy because we have moved to the poor and then the poor have joined us. And this is a wonderful form of dialogue. But after a while, we felt a bit handicapped. Huh? How do you train these people? And then we think, well, they don't have enough background, and then we give them an extra year or 2 years. And I don't think this is the right answer. The right answer is, from where do they come from? What is the cultural background? What kind of awareness do they bring about reality? How do they understand human relationships? And so forth. And accompany them in a different way. But for this, we need a tremendous imagination, a tremendous creativity, an openness to other ways of being, other ways of feeling, other ways of relating. And there, I think, floating awareness would do us good, would do us good. That's why the internationality that now in the society is developing more and more, and this is a wonderful sign, is helping us to realize that not everything is clear. Not everything is clear. I accept that the dictatorship of relativism is not good, but I realize that many things are relative. Many things are relative. That's one. If there is one thing I learned in Japan, was that human person is such a mystery, we can never grasp the person fully. And we have to move with agility, with openness around different models so that we can help them. And this, for education, I would consider a central challenge, central challenge. We are getting now a population in our universities and our institutions that is not only diverse in itself, it's totally diverse from the former generation. So it's a generational change, cultural change, mentality, questions, concerns are so different. And we cannot just offer one model of education. I'm sure that you know more than that because you are educators. I was. I'm now paying for my sins. So the starting point, therefore, will be always the real. And in that real, we want, and we are looking for change and transformation, because this is what Ignatius wanted from the retreatant and what he wanted through education, through ministry, that people could be transformed. And it's interesting to see that the whole, what we call Oriental spirituality, the Middle East, not the extreme Orient, but the Middle East spirituality is all transformation, is divinization, and something that is not reduced to the religious, but to the whole community. That's why they say sometimes, without understanding fully the Latin Church, that they don't have religious and they don't need them because the spirituality of the gospel is for everyone. And they are right in that. The thing is, we could sit down and talk a little more about other aspects. So likewise, I go back to my text. Likewise, Jesuit education should change us and our students. We are in a process of change, educators. There is no real deep encounter that doesn't change us. Then what kind of encounter do we have with our students if we are not changed? No? Or with the process of education itself. And the meaning of change now for our institutions would be who our students become. That becomes a very important point, what they value and what they do in life and work. To put it another way, in Jesuit education, the depth of learning and imagination encompasses and integrates intellectual rigor with reflection on the experience of reality, together with the creative imagination, to work toward constructing a more humane, just, sustainable, and faith-filled world. The experience of reality includes the broken world, especially the world of the poor, waiting for healing. With this depth, we are also able to recognize God as already at work in our world. Let me end this section, first section, asking you to picture in your mind the thousands of graduates we send forth from our Jesuit universities every year. How many of these who leave our institutions do so with both professional competence and the experience of having, in some way, during their time with us, the depth of engagement with reality, an engagement that transforms them at their deepest core? What more do we need to do to ensure that we are not simply populating the world with bright and skilled superficialities? I was very pleased yesterday to meet Chris Lohner, is the right pronunciation, the author of Heroic Leadership, who is with us here. I was very pleased to meet him because when he came to Manila, and I was in Manila to give a lecture, he was asked by a Jesuit after his brilliant presentation of how good we are in leadership. The Jesuit asked him, "And what is wrong with us?" So can you tell us also something about what is missing in our leadership? And then he very kindly, he was talking in a Jesuit institution, very kindly went around the question. And then the Jesuit continued, a Filipino Jesuit, I remember him. And he said, no, tell us what is missing, because we need to know that also, not only what is good. And then he told us, he said, well, since you ask, what is missing sometimes in Jesuit leadership are two things. One is sense of urgency. Sometimes we are very relaxed about it. And second, and that's the point that connects with what I was saying right now, is the ability and the willingness to go through evaluations and measure those evaluations. A confirmation of that, Chris, for your information, is that I receive many projects in Rome, and very seldom they come with a budget. So Jesuits are very good at thinking, and they want to do things. They are very generous, and they want. But to measure it and to make it realistic, and then to be able to follow it up, with some form of measurement, which is not mechanical measuring, is always a human and often spiritual fruits that we have to see. But this challenge of how are students being transformed, that should be able to be evaluated. How do they perform later? Not only if they keep praising the Jesuits, but do they collaborate when we get involved with faith and justice? Do they collaborate when some of the issues in which we are involved bring some conflict with the government? When this might bring some weakening in the profits they make in the companies, etc., etc. You know that better than I do. But this is a point that I think is worth keeping in mind. Second, we were saying in my reflections, rediscovering universality. I would now like to turn to a second challenge of the new globalized world, to Jesuit higher education. One of the most positive aspects of globalization, this is a very positive aspect, is that it has, in fact, made communication and cooperation possible with an ease and at a scale that was unimaginable even just a decade ago. The Holy Father, in his address to the 35th General Congregation, described our world as one of more intense communication among peoples, of new possibilities for acquaintance and dialogue, and a deep longing for peace. Among the emails I read in Pepe's office this morning, there is an invitation from Nicaragua. I'm going from here to Central America, Salvador, Nicaragua, and a call from Nicaragua, an alumnus saying, please, when you come here, tell us something about peace. Nicaragua is now with a number of tensions and so forth. So therefore, this is a very good sign that people are concerned for the important things. And we have to be there. People are longing for peace, for a positive, creative peace, not the peace of the cemeteries. As traditional boundaries have been challenged by globalization, our narrower understandings of identity, of belonging, responsibility have been redefined and broadened. Now, more than ever, we see that in all our diversity, we are in fact a single humanity, facing common challenges and problems. And as General Congregation 35 put it, we bear a common responsibility for the welfare of the entire world and its development in a sustainable and life-giving way. And the positive realities of globalization take us, along with this sense of common belonging and responsibility, to the means of working together, which are so numerous and readily available for those who are creative and courageous enough to use them. In today's university world, I know that many of you experience this breakdown of traditional boundaries in the contemporary demand that you internationalize in order to be recognized as universities of quality. Today, being international is one of the points that is going to be considered in every university and be evaluated under that perspective. I heard just that in Comillas, José Ramón Busto, who is there. Being international, being connected, having branches, or being linked to international dimensions now becomes one of the signs of a good university. And rightly so. I think this is a good point. In today's university world, many of you have successfully opened offshore or branch campuses or entered into twinning or cross-border programs that allow your students or faculty members to study or work abroad, to engage and appreciate other cultures, and to learn from and with people of diverse cultures. Everywhere I go, everywhere, in every country practically, when I have a dialogue with the Jesuits, they ask me how come the number of Jesuits fully involved in social centers or social apostolate has come down. We are far less than we were before. This is true, but at the same time, I cannot but say also in our schools we have much less people. But what is interesting is not that also in schools and universities the numbers are going down, but that in our universities, in our schools, we have many more programs now that have a social relevance than we had before. When I went to California last year, it was my first in the United States, I was greatly encouraged to see how in every one of our schools there was an outreach program, a broadening of the horizon of the school, bringing the students to other countries, to other continents, to help them see the world and be concerned with this world. So this is something that has changed and is in the process of broadening and developing very much. You have been also able to welcome more international students into your own universities. And all of these cross-cultural encounters and experiences surely enrich the quality of scholarship and learning in your institutions, as well as help you to clarify your own identity and mission as Catholic Jesuit universities. Hence, this increase of internationalization is helping you become better universities. It is not this, however, that I wish to emphasize at this point. What I wish to highlight flows from your discussions yesterday. I will break down my argument into 3 points. Here is where I preach to the choir, so you can relax. First, I'm sure that all of you will agree with Pope John Paul II, who in Ex Corde Ecclesia, observed that in addition to quality teaching and research, every Catholic university is also called on to become effective, responsible instrument of progress for individuals as well as for society. We mentioned earlier or yesterday in the Mass, how for Ignatius, every ministry is growth, is transformation. So therefore, here we are not talking about progress in material terms. We're talking about progress, the progress that supposes that a person goes through a number of experiences, learns, and grows. I know that in different ways, every Jesuit university is striving to become what Ignacio Ellacuría, the Jesuit rector of the Universidad Centroamericana Simeón Cañas, who was martyred 20 years ago, called a proyecto social. A social project. A university becomes a social project. Each institution represented here, with its rich resources of intelligence, knowledge, talent, vision, and energy, moved by its commitment to the service of faith and promotion of justice, seeks to insert itself into a society, not just to train professionals for the needs of that society, but in order to become a cultural force advocating and promoting truth, virtue, development, and peace in that society. We could say every university is committed to caritas in veritate, to promote love and truth. Truth that comes out in justice, in new relationships, and so forth. If I were to list all that you do for your regions or countries, all the programs and initiatives in public education, health, housing, human rights, peace and reconciliation, environmental protection, microfinance, disaster response, government, interreligious dialogue, and the like, we would be here all day. Second, however, thus far, largely what we see in each university, each institution working as a social project, a proyecto social, by itself, or at best with a national or regional network. And this, I believe, does not take sufficient account or advantage of what our new globalized world offers us as a possibility for greater service. People speak of the Jesuit university or higher education system. They recognize the family resemblances between Comillas in Madrid and Sanata Dharma in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, between Javeriana of Bogota and Loyola College in Chennai, between St. Peter's in Newark and St. Joseph in Beirut. There is a family resemblance. But as a matter of fact, there is only a commonality by Ignatian inspiration, rather than a coherent Jesuit university network. Each of our institutions operates relatively autonomously of each other, and as a result, the impact of each as a proyecto social is limited. The 35th General Congregation observed that in this global context, it is important to highlight the extraordinary potential we possess as international and multicultural body. It seems to me that till now, we have not fully made use of this extraordinary potential for universal service and as institutions of higher education. I think this is precisely the focus of many of your presentations and your concerns here. This brings me to my third and main point. Can we not go beyond the loose family relationships we now have as institutions and reimagine and reorganize ourselves so that in this globalized world, we can more effectively realize the universality which has always been part of Ignatius' vision of the society? Isn't this the moment to move like this? Surely the words used by the 35th General Congregation to describe the Society of Jesus as a whole apply as well to Jesuit universities around the world. And I quote, the new context of globalization requires us to act as a universal body with a universal mission, realizing at the same time the radical diversity of our situations. It is as a worldwide community and simultaneously as a network of local communities that we seek to serve others across the world. End of quote. To be concrete, while regional organizations of cooperation in mission exist among Jesuit universities, I believe the challenge is to expand them and build more universal, more effective international networks of Jesuit higher education. If each university, working by itself as a proyecto social, is able to accomplish so much good in society, how much more can we increase the scope of our service to the world if all the Jesuit institutions of higher education become, as it were, a single global proyecto social? So it's expanding already the awareness that you and we all have. Before coming here, some provincials, before coming here, we had the meeting of provincials of Africa in Rome, and I was there with them every day. And then some other provincials from Latin America were passing through Rome, so I had conversation with some of them. And a couple of them mentioned, well, since you are going to Mexico for this meeting, can you tell the rectors and the deans and the universities to share all the resources that they have? That would be a tremendous help for us who have only beginning institutions. For instance, if we could access the libraries, if we could access the resources that they are being offered in universities that have long-standing tradition and they have a know-how and they have resources that we cannot afford, that would be a great, great help. So I'm telling you. So, we are feeling the same now. As you know, we have announced in the society at least that we move from having a historical institute in Rome to having branches or small historical institutes around the world, and I hope that they can network, because I think this is the time that every culture, every group can have their own voice about their own history and not have Europeans interpreting the history of everybody else. No? And the response is very good, but we lack resources. And the main point is going to be, we are going to work in our own archives in Rome to copy, digitalize, do whatever we can so that this can be shared with other centers. And I think this would be a tremendous service of the universities. The universities that have a tradition, they have tremendous resources of files, of history, of materials, libraries, etc., that could be open to universities that cannot build a library in 10 years. This is something that needs 50, 100 years to be built. Your presence at this conference indicates your openness to a more universal dimension to your life and service as universities. That's why this topic has attracted all of you, and this is a very good sign. My hope, however, is that we can move from conferences and discussions like those we had yesterday to the establishment of operational consortia among our universities focused on responding together to some of the frontier challenges of our world, which have a supranational or supracontinental character. Frank Brennan challenged us to be concrete this afternoon, not to come with principles, but to come on concrete ways that we can put. So I think it's the same kind of invitation. The three discussion groups you participated in yesterday could serve, could serve as the start of three such consortia. First, a consortium to confront creatively, here we are pointing to some challenges, to confront creatively the challenge of the emergence of aggressive new atheisms. In Europe, they don't use this term, they use new aggressive secularism, very anti-church. I myself was impressed to see that, because Japan has been secular for 300 or 400 years. No? They are secular, total separation, church and state. Secularization is not news in Japan, but they have a peaceful secularism, peaceful and respectful of the other, of positions, of religions. They might tell you, I have no religion, but I respect, and Christianity is very much respected. In Europe, I have found a very aggressive secularism, not peaceful. Secularism without peace it has to be anti-something or against somebody. So this is something that requires study, that requires understanding why. Why have we come to that? And we see that particularly in the countries that have been most Catholic, Spain, Italy, Ireland, etc. There is where the crisis is bigger, because it goes against a historical presence of a church that was very powerful and very influential. So these new atheisms are not confined to the industrialized North and West, and somehow or other affect also other cultures, and a more generalized alienation from religion, often generated by false dichotomies drawn between science and religion. So this is always a topic in theological reflection. Second, a consortium focused, looking at another challenge, on more adequate analysis and more effective and lasting solutions to the world's poverty, inequality, and other forms of injustice. We are conscious that the challenges, and this is a question that keeps coming to me every time I meet a group, what are the challenges of the society? And the only answer is the same challenges of the world. There are no other challenges. The challenges looking for meaning, is it worth being human? Is it worth living? And the challenge of poverty, the challenge of death, the challenge of suffering, the challenge of violence and war, etc., etc. These are our challenges. So what can we do? What can we do? And third, a consortium focused on our shared concerns about global environmental degradation, which affects more directly and painfully the lives of the poor, with a view to enabling a more sustainable future for our world. This third consortium could further network the already existing ecology network currently under the direction of the Secretariat for Social Justice and Ecology of the Curia Generalizia. We have been very blessed with a very imaginative and active secretary who is here. I'm sorry for saying it. And we are developing now a section on ecology, so social justice and ecology. Therefore, this will be a point of reference also in this networking. Let me end this section by reminding you that universities as such came very late into Ignatius' understanding of how the Society of Jesus was to fulfill its mission in the church. Father Fernando Montes told us yesterday that Polanco, Nadal and Laínez forced Ignatius, put a little pressure on his arm to move in this direction. But Ignatius moved. What is striking is that in the constitutions, Ignatius makes clear why he is won over to the idea of what he calls universities of the society. The Society of Jesus accepts charge of universities so that the benefits of improvement in learning and in living, the growth factor, be spread more universally. The more universal good is what prompts Ignatius to accept responsibility for universities. With all the means globalization makes possible, then surely more effective networking in the manner I have described will allow us to spread the benefits of Jesuit higher education more universally in today's world. Third, learn ministry. In a sense, what I have described thus far as challenges to Jesuit higher education in this globalized world correspond to two of the three classic functions of the university. Insofar as universities are places of instruction, I have stressed the need to promote depth of thought and imagination. Insofar as universities are centers of service, I have invited us to move more decisively towards international networks focused on important supranational concerns. This leaves us with the function of research, the third function of research, the genuine search for truth and knowledge, but what is often called today the production of knowledge, a theme that in today's university world has generated much discussion on questions like the modes of research and its communication, the centers of knowledge production, areas of study, and the purposes of research. I'm sure that you will agree that if we are true to our Ignatian heritage, research in our universities must always ultimately be conceived of in terms of what the 34th General Congregation calls learned ministry, or the intellectual apostolate. This is Jesuit jargon. But as an aside, but an important point, the intellectual apostolate, sometimes a confusing term, applies to all Jesuit works and apostolates. It's not a reduced sector. All the virtues of the rigorous exercise of the intellect are required. Learning and intelligence, imagination and ingenuity, solid studies and rigorous analysis. And yet, it is always ministry or apostolate in the service of the faith, of the church, of the human family, and the created world that God wants to draw more and more into the realm of His kingdom of life and love. It is always research that is aimed at making a difference in people's lives, rather than simply a recondite conversation among members of a closed elite group. Again, I'm sure that if I were to enumerate all the serious scholarly work and discussions being done in Jesuit universities to address the serious contemporary problems Pope John Paul II enumerates in Ex Corde Ecclesiae, that is, the personal, the dignity of human life, the promotion of justice for all, the quality of personal and family life, the protection of nature, the search for peace and political stability, a more just sharing of the world's resources, and a new economic and political order that will better serve the human community at a national and international level. If I were to enumerate all that is being done, my allotted time would not be enough, and both you and me would faint in the process. In keeping with my approach throughout this reflection, I would now like to ask what challenges globalization poses to the learned ministry of research in Jesuit universities. And I would propose two. First, an important challenge to the learned ministry of our universities today comes from the fact that globalization has created knowledge societies in which development of persons, cultures, and societies tremendously dependent on access to knowledge grow. Globalization has created new inequalities between those who enjoy the power given to them by knowledge and those who are excluded from its benefits because they have no access to that knowledge. And we have seen how the poor of the world has changed from the poor of the streets to the proletariat and now we can speak about the excluded. The excluded. It's a different category, but again, it takes the inheritance of the poor of the world who are always with us. Thus, we need to ask who benefit from the knowledge produced in our institutions and who do not. Who need the knowledge we can share, and how can we share it more effectively with those for whom that knowledge can truly make a difference, especially the poor and excluded. We need also to ask some specific questions of faculty and students. How have they become voices for the voiceless, sources of human rights for those denied such rights, resources for protection of the environment, persons of solidarity for the poor, and the list could go on. In this connection, the work in progress of the Jesuit Commons that you have heard or you will hear about, which you will discuss tomorrow, is extremely important. Jesuit Commons. And it will require a more serious support and commitment from our universities if it is to succeed in its ambitious dream of promoting greater equality in access to knowledge for the sake of the development of persons and communities. And second, our globalized world has seen the spread of two rival isms. On the one hand, a dominant world culture marked by an aggressive secularism, as we were mentioning before, that claims that faith has nothing to say to the world and its great problems, and which often claims that religion, in fact, is one of the world's great problems. On the other hand, the resurgence of various fundamentalisms, often fearful or angry reactions to postmodern world culture, which escape complexity by taking refuge in a certain faith divorced from or unregulated by human reason. And as Pope Benedict points out, both secularism and fundamentalism exclude the possibility of a fruitful dialogue and effective cooperation between reason and religious faith. The Jesuit tradition of learned ministry, by way of contrast, has always combined a healthy appreciation of human reason, thought, and culture on the one hand, and a profound commitment to faith, the gospel, the church, and on the other. And this commitment included the integration of faith and justice in dialogue among religions and cultures. The training of the early Jesuits, for example, included the study of pagan authors of antiquity, the creative arts, science and mathematics, as well as a rigorous theological course of study. One only need consider the life and achievements of someone like Matteo Ricci, whose 400th death anniversary we celebrate this year, to see how this training that harmoniously integrated faith and reason, gospel and culture, bore such creative fruit. I know that a good number of people say, well, please don't compare me to Matteo Ricci. He was a genius. We always bring the genius, you know? And I take the point. I think it's a correct reaction. But at the same time, I would say the formation he received gave him the tools to be able to develop from there on his own genius. And the question is, the formation we give today, does it give so many tools? Are we that integrated? Are we that open in our training? This is a question that I think we have to consider. The Jesuit tradition, as secularism and fundamentalism spread globally, I believe that our universities are called to find new ways of creatively renewing this commitment to a dialogue between faith and culture that has always been a distinguishing mark of Jesuit learned ministry. This has been the mission entrusted to us by the papacy in the name of the Church. In 1983, at the 33rd General Congregation, Pope John Paul II asked that the Society for a deepening of research in the sacred sciences and in general even of secular culture, especially in the literary and scientific fields, already 1983. More recently, this was the call of Pope Benedict XVI to the Society of Jesus, its collaborators and its institutions during the 35th General Congregation. The Holy Father affirmed the special mission of the Society of Jesus in the Church to be at the frontiers, those geographical and spiritual places where others do not reach or find it very difficult to reach, and identified particularly as frontiers those places where faith and human knowledge, faith and modern science, faith and the fight for justice meet. As Pope Benedict observed, this is not a simple undertaking, but one that calls for courage and intelligence and a deep sense of being rooted in the very heart of the Church. I'm convinced that the Church asks this intellectual commitment of the Society because the world today needs such a service. The unreasoning stance of fundamentalism distorts faith and promotes violence in the world, as many of you know from experience. The dismissive voice of secularism blocks the Church from offering to the world the wisdom and resources that the rich theological, historical, cultural heritage of Catholicism can offer to the world. Can Jesuit universities today, with energy and creativity, continue the legacy of Jesuit learned ministry and forge intellectual bridges between gospel and culture, faith and reason, for the sake of the world and her great questions and problems? Let me conclude. According to good Jesuit tradition, the time has come for a repetitio, for a sum up. I have sought to reflect with you on the challenges of globalization to Jesuit universities as institutions of learning, service, and research. First, emerging cultural world of our students more deeply and find creative ways of promoting depth of thought and imagination, a depth that is transformative of the person. Second, in order to maximize the potentials of new possibilities of communication and cooperation, I urge the Jesuit universities to work towards operational international networks that will address important issues touching faith, justice, and ecology that challenge us across countries and continents. Finally, to counter the inequality of knowledge distribution, I encourage a search for creative ways of sharing the fruits of research with the excluded and in response to the global spread of secularism and fundamentalism. I invited Jesuits universities to a renewed commitment to the Jesuit tradition of learned ministry, which mediates between faith and culture. From one point of view, I think you can take everything I have said and show that the directions I shared are already being attempted or even successfully accomplished in your universities. That's where my feeling of preaching to the choir. Then one can take what I have said as a kind of invitation to the Magis. So if you are already doing it, it's just an invitation to continue with our Magis, calling for some fine-tuning, as it were, of existing initiatives, asking that we do better or more of what we are already doing or trying to do. I think that is a valid way of accepting these challenges. I would like to end, however, by inviting you to step back for a moment to consider a perhaps more fundamental question that I have found myself asking myself and others in the past 2 years. If Ignatius and his first companions were to start the Society of Jesus again today, would they still take on universities as ministry of the society? Or another question would be, how would Ignatius enter or recommend that Jesuits enter this service, this ministry? New foundations, entering the universities that are already alive, etc., etc. There are many options possible. Already in 1995, General Congregation 34 saw that the universities were growing in size and complexity, and at the same time the Jesuits were diminishing in number within the universities. In 1995, when General Congregation 34 spoke about the diminishing numbers of Jesuits in universities, there were about 22,850 Jesuits in the world. Today, in 2010, there are about 18,250, about 4,600 less Jesuits. I need not go into further statistics to indicate the extent of this challenge. I am very aware of and grateful for the fact that in the past 15 years, there has been much creative and effective work aimed at strengthening the Catholic and Ignatian identity of our institutions, at creating participative structures of governance, and at sharing our spiritual heritage, mission, and leadership with our collaborators. I am also very aware of and delighted to see how our colleagues have become true collaborators, real partners in the higher education mission and ministry of the society. These are wonderful developments the universities can be proud of and need to continue as the number of Jesuits continues to decline. I believe we need to continue and even increase these laudable efforts of better educating, preparing, and engaging lay collaborators in leading and working in Jesuit institutions. I can honestly say that this is one of the sources of my hope in the service of the society and of the Church. If we Jesuits were alone, we would be thinking all kinds of strange thoughts. But with the kind of lay collaborators, the kind of professionalism and commitment and depth that we have in our collaborators, we can continue dreaming and beginning new enterprises and moving ahead. This is something I would like to express with very deep thanks for all of you who are here. I believe we need to continue and even increase these laudable efforts. I think one of the most, perhaps the most fundamental ways of dealing with this issue, is to place ourselves in the spiritual space of Ignatius and the first companions, and with their energy, creativity, and freedom, ask their basic question afresh. What are the needs of the Church and our world, where we are needed most, and where and how can we serve best? These questions continue. The questions about Jesuit survival are not important. These questions of the Church and of the world are our questions. I would invite you for a few moments to think of yourselves not as presidents of CEOs of large institutions, or administrators, or academics, but as co-founders of a new religious group, discerning God's call to you as an apostolic body in the Church. In this globalized world, with all its lights and shadows, how would running these universities still be the best way we can respond to the mission of the Church and the needs of the world? Or perhaps the question could be, what kind of universities, with what emphasis, with what directions would we run if we were refounding the Society of Jesus in today's world? I'm inviting in all my visits to all the Jesuits to recreate the Society of Jesus, because I think every generation has to recreate the faith, they have to recreate the journey, they have to recreate their institutions. So this is not only a good desire. I think that if we lose the ability to recreate, we have lost the spirit. In the Gospels, we often find unfinished endings. The original ending of the Gospel of Mark, with the women not saying a word about the message of the angel at the tomb, the ending of the parable of the prodigal son, which ends with an unanswered question from the father to the older brother. These ambiguous endings may be unsettling and precisely meant to provoke deeper, more fundamental questioning and responses. I therefore have good precedents to conclude my talk in this open-ended way. I hope I leave you reflecting on to what extent the challenges I have offered this morning are about improving our institutions and the mission and ministry to help shape a more humane, just, faith-filled, sustainable world, or our calls to, in some sense, refound what Ignatius called the universities of the society. Thank you very much.